Hey y'all, it's Tim Miller from the Bulwark. Wanted to give you a Sunday morning update. But first, a curse to whoever came up with the idea that we fall back. Let's fix that, Kamala. We're not falling back anymore. And second, make sure you subscribe to the feed because I have even more inside info coming for you on that huge, massive Iowa poll that Ann Seltzer broke for the Des Moines Register last night, showing Kamala Harris winning the state of Iowa by 3 points. More to come on that later today. Make sure you're subscribed to the feed. But for this morning's update, I want to focus on two things. One, the Trump rally last night, but first, another set of polls from the New York Times and Siena. What you see here is a little bit more of a mixed bag than Iowa. I'll just give you the top line numbers, and then we'll go through what we learned from this poll. New York Times Siena, for people who've been watching this channel for a while, you know, I put a little special emphasis on New York Times Siena because they are clearly not hurting. They've had some outlier results. Nate Cohn gives very detailed rationale for the underlying assumptions of his poll. And so it doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean it's going to be 100% right, but you can interpret it, I think, a lot more clearly than some of the other garbage that's out there in the public data. So with that, here we go. The best state for Kamala Harris in this poll, Nevada. It shows her +3. There's some interesting early vote data in here too. I'm gonna circle back on with regards to Nevada. North Carolina, Kamala Harris +2. I continue to think that North Carolina might be the sleeper state for the vice president. Wisconsin, Kamala Harris +2, 49-47. Georgia, this is a surprise. Kamala Harris +1, 48-47. So that's her winning 4 of the 7 swing states, but not the usual ones you've seen. She's picking up Georgia and North Carolina, and is tied in these next two, Pennsylvania and Michigan, in the blue wall. 48-48 in Pennsylvania, 47-47 in Michigan, and Donald Trump with a persistent lead in Arizona, 49-45, at least in New York Times Siena. So, what do we learn here? Again, directionally, it's a good weekend for the vice president. I think that is pretty clear. These polls, if the Nate Cohn surveys turn out to be right, she would get an unexpected path to 270, maybe without going through the blue wall. She'd be well over 270 with Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. So either way, that is a winning map for her. A couple of the interesting things from this poll. There's a little bit of a conflict with the Seltzer poll because the Seltzer poll is showing this big gain among older white voters. And the Times Siena poll is actually showing a little bit of a backsliding for Kamala Harris among working class white voters, but shoring up the younger voters and black voters that she had struggled with in previous Times Siena polls. So that's something to watch. I think more importantly, among those who said they decided over the last few days, Harris has a 58-42 lead, including a 66-34 lead among late deciders in those 4 Sunbelt states, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. So, again, we have now 3 pieces of data about this. David Plouffe said the internal campaign data showed her with about a 10-point lead among late deciders. Seltzer's poll obviously showing her with a lead among late deciders. New York Times Siena showing her with a 16-point lead among late deciders. In both 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump actually broke with late deciders. This was something that people polling the last weekend caught in 2016. It's just some of us didn't want to believe it. And then in 2020, for folks who don't remember, Biden ended up having a much more significant lead going into the final weekend that closed. So this does happen, where there's a break one direction among late deciders. There's some evidence that's going her way. It makes sense when you consider that most of these late deciders don't like Trump. I mean, Sarah Longwell's talked about this a lot with regards to her focus groups. And so if they already have a baseline don't like Trump, the question is, can you get them there for Harris? Are they going to hold their nose for Trump again? Are they just not going to vote, right? But if you have a baseline of having an unfavorable view among this group, that makes it a relatively more challenging hill for Donald Trump to climb. Then you layer on top of that, he hasn't exactly been doing anything these last 2 weeks that's going to appeal to those voters. I mean, in 2016, we talked about this all the time, how he kind of chilled out a little bit the last 2 weeks. That has not been the case during this campaign, and it's even more so with the latest from last night's rally that I want to get into next. But before we do that, there's one other thing from the New York Times poll I wanted to focus on, and that is this Nevada early vote. If you are a sicko and you're on the internet, you've probably been watching John Ralston and others analyze the Nevada early vote numbers, which looked quite good for Republicans during the beginning of the early vote, has looked less good for Republicans over the past few days, but still directionally good for Republicans. Ralston, who's kind of the dean of the Nevada press corps, was very bullish on the Republican early vote registration number a couple of days ago, and has kind of tempered his rhetoric a little bit on that. But an interesting fact from the Times poll, just to monitor: Harris is leading by 3 in the poll, but it actually, the internals reflect the Republican advantage in early voting. Republicans have a 2-point edge among early voters in the Times Siena poll, but early voters nonetheless say they back Ms. Harris by 5 points because she has a wide lead among unaffiliated voters who cast early ballots. There's been a huge surge of unaffiliated voters in Nevada. We don't exactly know who those people are. Nevada has become an automatic voter registration state. So one theory that's been out there is that newly registered voters, younger voters in particular, are turning out in Nevada, and that's actually good for Harris. Despite the fact that like the registered Democrat number was trailing a bit what they would hope for. So it's an interesting data point, and I think it goes to show that also just how fickle it is, how dangerous it is to just overly obsess with the voter registration numbers in these early vote totals. We don't know if some of the Republicans that are turning out are Nikki Haley voters. We don't know who the unaffiliated voters are and how they're going to break. We don't know who's going to turn out on Election Day. I mean, I keep coming back to in 2020, Democrats were more cautious around COVID, and so were more likely to want to vote by mail and vote early when it wasn't as crowded, et cetera, rather than going and waiting in a long line during, while the virus was spreading around America. Then Republicans were more laissez-faire about that. So, in addition to the fact that Donald Trump told them not to trust the mail. So for a variety of reasons, we could be seeing a Democratic Election Day surge over 2020 just because people like voting on Election Day, and they just didn't do it last time because they're worried about the coronavirus. So take all of that with a grain of salt. Directionally positive news from Harris across Seltzer, across the New York Times, and some of these internal points, particularly the Nevada independent vote, or unaffiliated vote, as they call it in Nevada. Lastly, I should at least mention Morning Consult, which is a much less reliable pollster for me than New York Times Siena, came out with a more favorable view for Trump across the swing states this morning. So, don't go getting too cozy out there. And make sure you're watching this video while you're knocking on doors or making phone calls or, I don't know, parenting, whatever. Do something useful. Finally, last night at the rally, I didn't want to ignore this. There's a moment at the rally where there's a little call and response with the crowd.
And when you lie about something so simple, she never worked there, but I did a little bit. This place is amazing.
It's kind of muddled there. If you couldn't quite hear it, people in the room, reporters, including CNN reporters, said that what you suspect to have heard is what you heard, that Kamala Harris was working on the corner, referencing, obviously, her being a prostitute. Donald Trump gets a big chuckle out of that. It is reminiscent. I know it's corny at this point and cheesy to talk about the John McCain moment where the woman calls Barack Obama an Arab, and how he kind of corrects her and says, no, ma'am. He's a good man. And we are a long way from that. We are a long way from that. And we should expect better. I know we've been known. We should expect better than having a presidential nominee making a joke about how his female opponent is a prostitute, is a hooker who works the street corners. It's in addition to being sexist, it's obviously a little racist as well. And these are the kinds of people that are being incentivized on the right now. I mean, there's this whole big discussion over the garbage and and it's like, well, if you act like garbage, you're gonna get called garbage. And not everybody that supports Donald Trump and votes for Donald Trump is a bad person, obviously, but Donald Trump is bringing out the worst in people. And last night at the rally, he was once again demonstrating that he brings out the garbage. And when you have garbage in, you get garbage out. And there's certainly been a lot of garbage out of Donald Trump's mouth and out of his campaign events. So that's about all I got on that. Like I said, there'll be more later today on the Iowa poll, deep dive. Make sure you're subscribed to the feed. Stick around. And if there's any other breaking news, we are around all weekend and through Election Day right here on the Bulwark YouTube page. See you soon.